All right, everybody. Hello. Welcome in to Bleav in Steelers, powered by FanDuel. The Steelers defeat the Miami Dolphins 28-15 and advance to 8-6 on the season. And they did so without making any fans break a sweat. I said this after the Browns game earlier this season in week 6. And what I said at the time was that was the most carefree, stress-free game I can recall watching since Ben retired. This fits exactly into that category. Never at any point in the game did I think the result was in doubt. The Steelers took care of business in every facet. We'll dive into everything on today's show. So if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe. If you're listening as a podcast, comment and review. But let's dive into it. Yeah. So the first half of this game, pretty slow. It ends with the Steelers leading 7-3 at the end of the first half. Connor Hayward runs in a touchdown from a yard out. And that was the first 4 straight touchdown drives for the Steelers. The first time they've done that since 2018. So 7 years since we've seen that. Offensively, incredibly proficient. And from an Aaron Rodgers standpoint, the second straight game where he just looked dialed in. 23 of 27, 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, 85% completion percentage. That's his highest in a single game since 2014. Aaron's been dialed in these last 2 games. And we're seeing a really good balance of the run game, and it's translating into the pass game. Like, every aspect of the offense is working right now, which is good to see. Some might say it comes with the caveat of going against, a Ravens defense that struggled earlier in the year, and a Dolphins team that hasn't been great. But you don't apologize for playing well in the NFL. And when you're playing teams like Miami, who the Steelers are better than, and you go out and you just, frankly speaking, kick their ass, that's a good sign. Had this game gone down to the wire and it, came down to a Boz field goal at the end and they won 17-14, I'd be a lot less confident in them going forward right now. But they were winning 28-3 at one point in the fourth quarter. Miami put together a couple of touchdown drives, but the game was well out of reach. And they weren't even hurrying, by the way. Aikman kept talking about it on the broadcast where he's like, why are they not hurrying? They're down 3 scores. They're just do they not care? So the 28-15 score makes the game look a lot closer than it actually was. Again, Pittsburgh was leading 28-3 at one point in this game. And they came out in the second half swinging on both ends. They held the Dolphins to negative 20 yards in the third quarter. So if you're watching or listening to this, you had 20 more yards than Miami did in the third quarter of this game. Just an incredible job by the defense. Without Derek Harmon, without TJ Watt. My biggest concern coming into the game was the fact that the Dolphins can run the ball. Devin Achian's speed is a problem, especially for the Steelers, who don't necessarily match up well against speed backs and just offenses that are built off speed in general. They held Achian to 60 yards. Now, granted, it was on 5 yards a carry, but the fact that the offense was so efficient and got out to such a big lead, it took away Miami's ability to lean on the run game because they had to, try to up-tempo some stuff and get back in the game. So they took Achane out of it by virtue of scoring, and that was really cool to see. But the fact that we saw Asante Samuel get his first interception as a Steeler, very neat. Joey Porter Jr. Continues to I don't want to say quietly, because I think a lot of Steelers fans are seeing him get better. But from a national perspective, I don't think he's getting nearly the attention that he should be getting right now, because last night against the Dolphins, this is per Next Gen Stats, Joey Porter was targeted 4 times. He allowed 1 reception for 16 yards, and his catch rate over expected was negative 33.5. He had a tremendous game, locking down Jalen Waddle or whoever he was matched up against throughout the game. Tua Tagovailoa, again, the numbers are a little bit misconstrued because of the last 2 drives that Miami went on. The game was already decided. The Steelers, it's not as if they were worried about the outcome. He finished with 253 passing yards. But Jalen Waddle was a non-factor. 2 catches for 26 yards. Achane is the one who really, quote unquote, hurt them in the passing game. And a lot of that was just swing passes that he got yards after the catch on. So the Steelers did a tremendous job shutting down the passing game and the running game of the Dolphins defensively without 2 of their best defenders. And both Asante Samuel Jr., Joey Porter Jr. We need to think of like an 80s tag team name for Joey Porter Jr. and Asante Samuel Jr. Both guys who are sons of NFL legends. We can't use the bloodline. That's already been taken. But if you got a good one, please let me know, whether it be in the comments on here or on Twitter at J Bailey NFL, because we need to come up with a nickname for these 2 guys. They played phenomenal last night. They deserve a lot of credit for that. But the 4 straight touchdown drives, like I said, hasn't been done in Pittsburgh since 2018. That's a long time. They end the first half with the Connor Hayward touchdown. And then in the second half, they just put together drive after drive after drive that, were long. They had a 71-yard touchdown drive. That was only on 6 plays, but that was after the short kick of the opening kickoff. They started at the 40-yard line or the 35, wherever the hell they start. Wherever they start drives after the kickoff doesn't reach the landing zone. But they go 6 plays, 71 yards. It's capped off with a touchdown pass to Marquez Valdez-Scantling, of all guys. That's his only catch of the day. But 1 catch, 19 yards, and a touchdown. It's pretty clear why Pittsburgh went out and got MVS, and that has a lot to do with the built-in chemistry that he and Aaron had from their time in Green Bay. And on that play, and I can't remember who pointed it out. I think it was like Nate Tice pointed it out on Twitter. On that play, if it looked familiar, it's because it had been ran against the Steelers a couple times this year. And it's not like an extravagant concept. Every team probably has some variation of this in their playbook. But it was a deep double crosser that the Steelers got beat on in week 1 against the Jets, and that they got beat on in week 2 against the Seahawks. It worked out in their favor. I want to say it was either Adam Thielen or DK on the left side, MVS on the right side. Again, both cross. MVS gets a step off the crosser. Aaron hits him in stride. He's wide open for a touchdown. And that is basically where the game ended, because then the Dolphins go 3 and out. The Steelers go 10 plays, 77 yards. And then DK Metcalf remembered that he's built like a Jeep in cleats, catches the ball over the middle, throws Minkah Fitzpatrick off him, breaks 2 more tackles, and powers into the end zone. And like legitimately like one of the better highlights of the season, not just for the Steelers, but anybody in general. I mean, when you're throwing an all-pro safety and then breaking 2 more tackles to barrel your way into the end zone, I mean, that's a highlight. So I think that when DK remembers, oh yeah, I am a massive human being who is bigger than most dudes out here, and I can use that to my advantage, he plays pretty well. He had 3 catches in that touchdown. Was very happy to see him have a play like that where he just remembers. He just basically Hulk smashed the entirety of the Miami Dolphins secondary, and Steelers went up 21-3 at that point. And then the ensuing drive from Miami, another 3 and out. So the previous drive for the Dolphins, they had 2 drives. They had 6 plays, negative 20 yards. The first one went 3 plays, -8, and the second went 3 plays, -12. And then the first drive of the fourth quarter, Arthur Smith does Arthur Smith things. They get inside the red zone, and they run a toss to Jonnu Smith. Credit to Adam Thielen. If you go back and watch the All-22, he has a key block on the outside to seal off the hole. Jonnu Smith hits the gap and runs it into the end zone. So tremendous offensive showing from the Steelers. It's the first time in NFL history, apparently, that 2 tight ends ran for a touchdown in the same game. And, of course, it's an Arthur Smith coach team that does that. It's just very funny. But overall, very little to complain about in this game. The result was never in doubt. They controlled the game. Even like in after the first quarter, it's scoreless, or the Dolphins are winning 3-0, whatever it was. The result never felt in doubt. Once Tua threw the interception to Asante Samuel, I was like, okay, yeah, the Steelers are going to win this game. And it was nice to have a game like that. As Steelers fans, we don't get too many games like that where the result is never really up in the air. And, I said this at the top of the show, but like week 6 against Cleveland was one of those games. They won 23-9. They hit Dylan Gabriel like 17 times or whatever the number was. Game was never in doubt. This very much fits into that category as well, where from start to finish, they were the better team. They were efficient on both sides of the ball and really just took care of business. There's a lot of guys who deserve singled out. I'll start with this. Dylan Cook, first start Monday night, filling in for both Broderick Jones and Andrews Pete at left tackle, who were both dealing with injuries, and he played fantastic. We didn't hear his name really at all last night, and that's a good thing. It means that he was on top of things. He did really well against Bradley Chubb and kept Aaron Rodgers largely very clean. Aaron was sacked 3 times. None of them really consequential. None of them hard hits. So I'd have to go look at if he was credited with giving up a sack or not. But Dylan Cook played really well, and that was really good to see. In terms of the run game, 135 yards on the ground as a team. Kenneth Gainwell, 80 yards on the ground, 46 yards receiving, 126 yards on 20 touches. I have been a guy who was critical that Kenneth Gainwell was getting more touches and more opportunities than Jaylen Warren. Over the last 3 games, though, he has proven that he is a legitimate dual threat guy. And that's not to say that I don't think that Jaylen Warren should continue getting touches. He absolutely should. But with Kenneth Gainwell playing the way he's playing, I understand why they are leaning on him. And he continues to be a big part of the offense. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, Kenneth Gainwell leads the Steelers in catches, which doesn't happen very often when a running back leads the team in catches. But he had 7 last night. And it's usually just they gave him one on one of the 4th down conversions where it's 4th and 2, 4th and 3. They, have him run a little out route from the backfield, easy pitch and catch, first down, stuff like that. Chain movers, you get a nice chunky yardage. That's what Kenneth Gainwell has been proven to be very useful in terms of the receiving game. So big game for Kenneth Gainwell. Was happy to see that. Again, Aaron played tremendous. And I thought Art called a really good game. I mean, when you have as balanced of an attack as the Steelers did, 224 passing yards from Aaron Rodgers, 135 yards on the ground, spreading the ball out really well. Pat Freiermuth had 3 catches. Darnell Washington had 3 catches. Jaylen Warren had 3 catches. Jonnu Smith had 2. Adam Thielen had 1. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 guys with a catch last night. So spreading the ball out. And, this isn't a team filled with elite offensive talent. But when it's clicking and when Rodgers is feeling it, when they can spread the ball around and when they can run the ball well, it's a team that can put up points. And in January, that's what you need is an offense that can score. And they've shown that they can do that. So that was a big takeaway from me on that end. Defensively, we talked about Joey Porter Jr. already in the game that he had. Asante Samuel having a big game. The newcomers were a big thing for me. A lot of guys who weren't on the team in week 1 that have come in and made a difference. Asante Samuel Jr. had the pick. Adam Thielen had the really good outside seal for Jonnu Smith to run for a touchdown. Imagine hearing that sentence, by the way, a year ago. It's like, oh yeah, in week 15 of 2025, Adam Thielen's going to have a key block for a Jonnu Smith touchdown run for Pittsburgh. And both of them, were pivotal in the win. Adam Thielen, again, the key block. Even guys like Kyle Duggar, who were acquired before the trade deadline. He's come in and played really well. It's a lot of these newcomers that weren't on the roster in week 1 who have come in and have played incredibly well. And that's been really cool to see. Patrick Queen in this game, 10 tackles, 2 of them for loss. Jalen Ramsey had a sack on Tua. He had 6 tackles on the night and a sack. 3 sacks on the season, by the way, for Jalen Ramsey. I think Buck said it on the broadcast. He entered this year with 3 sacks in his career, and he's already doubled that. That's pretty cool to see. So Jalen Ramsey, big game. Cam Hayward had 2 tackles for loss and a sack. Asizi Atamawo had his first sack on the season. Peyton Wilson had a sack. Just a lot of really good performances on that side of the ball. And again, it can't be overstated just how impressive it was without Derek Harmon, without TJ Watt, to be able to limit this Dolphins run game to just 63 yards on the ground. When my biggest worry going into the game was that, all right, no Derek Harmon, the Steelers' run defense isn't nearly as good when he's not on the field. And they played great. So credit to them for slowing down the running attack of the Dolphins and held them to less than 4 yards a carry as a team as well. And again, Jalen Waddle wasn't a factor. 2 catches for 26 yards for Jalen Waddle. The biggest receiving threat, if you want to call it that, was Darren Waller in garbage time, who caught 2 touchdowns when the game was already all but decided. So in terms of like negatives, there's not a lot. They were well coached. I think Mike Tomlin did a tremendous job in putting together a good game plan and limiting anything the Dolphins do well. Arthur Smith did a great job in terms of the offensive game plan and the play calling. If there's anybody who came away as a, quote unquote, and I don't like using this word necessarily, but like a loser of last night, it's probably Roman Wilson, because he was a healthy scratch again. And if I had to guess, probably not going to be on the roster next year. They'll trade him somewhere where maybe he can be used, whether that be to a receiver needy team like the 49ers, somewhere else, a Tennessee, Vegas, somewhere where he can actually be used and have a fresh start. But I would guess Roman Wilson's not going to be on the roster next year, just based off him being a healthy scratch for 2 straight games. The Steelers offense looking better. Now, I don't think there's a direct correlation necessarily between benching Roman Wilson and the offense playing better. But when that happens and you see instant production, MVS gets in. He only has 1 catch, but it's a 19-yard touchdown. There's something to say for having chemistry with a guy. And I think that that's, what Aaron was hoping to get, is a guy that he's played with before, knows what he wants to do, and it worked out. Same reason why they signed Adam Thielen. Aaron wants veterans in the room who know what they're doing. And, whether you want to say that's fair or not to Roman Wilson, I would have Roman Wilson in the lineup over Calvin Austin, personally. But my guess is he'll get moved in the offseason, have a fresh start, and good for him. I think that is what will happen. Overall, like, not too much else to say about this game. Like, usually, in these game recaps, especially after a loss, it features a lot of ranting about things that went wrong and like things that have gone wrong for the last number of years. In terms of like just pure dominance, again, you can put this up there with the Week 6 win over Cleveland and the most like stressless, never in doubt wins of the last like 5 years. Never once was I worried that the Steelers were going to lose this game. Again, which is a nice feeling. We don't get that too many. We don't get too many of those as Steelers fans in recent memory. But now at 8-6, they still sit atop the AFC North. I know a lot of people are wondering, all right, what's this look like in terms of can they clinch the AFC North before Week 18? The answer is yes, but they need a lot of help. So in order for them to clinch, they need to either, well, the easiest way for them to do it would be they win the next 2 games, Baltimore loses, I think, one of those games. But if the Ravens, let's say the Ravens lose to New England, the Steelers beat the Lions. Now they're sitting at 9-6. The Ravens are 7-8. Baltimore's still alive because the Steelers could lose to the Browns and then lose to the Ravens. But if the Steelers win the next 2 and Baltimore loses the next 2, the division's wrapped up. Week 18 is meaningless. So basically, you're rooting heavily. I mean, you're going to do it anyway. The Ravens, we're never going to root for the Ravens, but really rooting for Baltimore to lose to New England. And then they go on the road to play Green Bay in Week 17. Those are both games that they could very realistically lose. And if they do, Pittsburgh wins the division, which almost makes it, I shouldn't say like these next 2 games are quote unquote meaningless, because they're not. especially if the Ravens do lose these next 2 games. But the Steelers, if they lose to both Detroit and Cleveland, if they beat Baltimore in week 18, they still win the division. So again, next 2 games aren't meaningless because if Baltimore loses to New England and Green Bay and the Steelers win at least 1 game against Detroit and Cleveland, then they win the division. But if they do lose these next 2, it's not the end of the world. It just means that they have to win in week 18 to win the division. So the game's not meaningless, like I said, because they could clinch the division before week 18 with some help from New England and Green Bay. But it certainly does look like the most likely outcome is they'll be playing for the division in week 18, if I had to guess. I don't know if Baltimore's going to lose these next 2 games. Especially, I know that they're going on the road to play the Packers, but Micah Parsons, out for the year with the torn ACL. That will certainly impact what Green Bay does defensively. I mean, it's their best player. Anytime you lose a guy of that caliber, things change. Being that game's in Lambeau, certainly benefits Green Bay. If that game was in Baltimore, I'd probably feel a lot more confident that Baltimore wins that. But New England and Green Bay, none of those are gimmies, especially with how the Ravens have looked this season. I know that they just shut out the Bengals, but there's a lot of drama going on in Cincinnati right now. It's been a wasted season for them. Another wasted season of Joe Burrow. So not to say that I'm completely dismissing the Ravens, because they certainly could, split these next 2 games and make week 18 for the division in Pittsburgh. And which, again, if you look at all the simulations and whatnot, or the analytical odds, that seems to be the odds-on expectation of what's going to happen, is that week 18 will be with the AFC North on the line. And if that's the case, that game's certainly going to be flexed. That's going to be the Sunday night game, similar to what they usually try to do that every year, which is why they wait. If you go and look at the Steelers schedule or whatever, it'll say TBD in terms of the time and the network. We saw that with Aaron Rodgers a couple years ago when he was still in Green Bay. They flexed Packers-Lions to Sunday night. The Lions didn't have anything to play for at that point, but if the Packers won, then they got into the playoffs. The Lions won. And that was Aaron Rodgers' last game as a Packer. So, we've there are certain possibilities that Pittsburgh does wrap up the division before week 18. And for the next 2 weeks, if you're a Steelers fan, you are a big New England Patriots fan, and you are a big Green Bay Packers fan. Not to say that the Steelers couldn't beat the Ravens again, because I think that they can and they will. But if you can go into week 18 knowing that you got the 4 seed locked up, you can maybe rest a guy or, some guys that you want to ensure their health going into week 18. And hell, you can maybe throw in Will Howard for a little bit, because a bunch of Steelers fans really want to see that. So why not have Mason Rudolph play the first half, have Will Howard play the second half, or vice versa, whatever you want to do. But there is a world where Aaron Rodgers can sit week 18. How about that, by the way? When's the last time the Steelers could rest starters in week 18? Good Lord. Well, 2020, I guess, when they rested Ben and all the starters against the Browns, and then the Browns beat them. Whoops. That's the last time they were able to rest starters, because they had the division locked up by week 17. That was before we had 17 games. That was the last year of 17 or 16 games. So there is a world where they can wrap up the division. And hopefully they do, because again, I would love to see the Ravens not make the playoffs. Great. But also, if you can rest Aaron Rodgers, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the entire game. If you want to give him, treat it like a preseason game at that point. If you want to give him a drive or a quarter, just so he can at least have some game action and not go 2 weeks without playing, that makes sense. That's fine. But then get Mason Rudolph in there. And if you want to get Will Howard in there and get him some game reps, hey, do that. But with the emergency third quarterback situation, they would have to probably make Aaron inactive. You can only put in that third quarterback if both your starting two get hurt. And they made that rule because if you remember in the NFC title game a few years ago, Brock Purdy got hurt. That was after Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo both got hurt. They didn't have really anybody else to use at quarterback. Purdy couldn't throw the ball. It was just a bad time for all. So maybe they just make Aaron inactive. They play Mason Rudolph. They play Will Howard in week 18. If Baltimore loses these next two games, that's fine with me. Rest as many guys as you can. Get some young guys, some reps. Get Jack Sawyer in there a little bit more. Maybe get Carson Bruner some defensive reps instead of just special teams. Do a bunch of different stuff that you wouldn't be able to do if the game still meant something. So if you're looking for the ways that they can clinch, the easiest way to do that is if Baltimore loses their next two games. Now, I guess you could say if the Steelers win their next two games, that would certainly be helpful. But if the Ravens win their next two games, then it's still for the division. So if the Steelers win their next two and Baltimore loses at least one, then things are looking up for the Steelers. But there's so many different scenarios where it's pretty convoluted. But the easiest way for the Steelers to have the division wrapped up is if the Ravens lose their next two games, which is certainly possible. Certainly possible. I do want to look at just the easiest ways, just to make sure I'm not talking out of my butt. So, this is per my good friend Alan Saunders. So, the last time I'll clarify it just in case anybody's confused. So, outside of beating Baltimore in week 18, if they beat Detroit and Cleveland and the Ravens lose once, the Steelers win the division. And if the Steelers beat Detroit or Cleveland and the Ravens lose both of their next two games, then the division is also wrapped up. That was very long and convoluted, I know. Apologies for the rant. But Pittsburgh's 8-6. They're playing really well right now. And that's the most important thing. In terms of like the potential teams that they could play in the postseason, if I had to pick, I would probably say the Chargers. I know Pittsburgh lost that first matchup. And the scoreboard, it looked very one-sided. But you got to remember, the Steelers had their worst offensive performance of the year that game. Aaron had maybe the worst game of his career that game. And the game was still within reach at the beginning of the fourth quarter. So, and when you look at all the different injuries that the Chargers have sustained, especially on the offensive line, there's not a lot of elite pieces offensively that scare you when looking at the Chargers. And if that game's in Pittsburgh, I'd feel pretty confident that they could win that game. I don't want them to play Buffalo. That game will go the exact way that the first one went. I'd prefer if they didn't play Houston. Their defense is very good. I think the Steelers could do pretty well against Houston's offense because they don't have a run game that horrifies you. That would be a low-scoring rock fight. That would certainly be the Peacock game. That's the first game on Saturday. So if I had to pick which two I'd prefer them to play, I'd probably say the Chargers. And I get, I know I just said maybe not Houston, but in terms of like their offense, I think Pittsburgh's defense could handle their offense. It's just a matter of can you get enough points on the board against that defense? Because the defense is very good. Depending on what happens in the AFC South, like if they had to host Jacksonville, I love Trevor Lawrence. I think he's, in terms of his talent, it's certainly there, and he put it on display against the Jets. He had 6 touchdowns. But they are also a team that is pretty volatile. And I wouldn't look at playing the Jaguars as a death sentence. I think the Steelers could beat the Jaguars. And now if I had to choose Jacksonville or Houston, I'd probably choose Jacksonville. So the Chargers and the Jaguars would be the two teams that I would pick. That would include Jacksonville losing at least 2 of their next games because the Texans are a game behind. Jaguars are 10-4. Texans are 9-5. The Texans would need to get. I don't know what the tiebreaker situation is in the AFC South right now. But if there is a way that the Steelers could play the Jaguars, I'd be fine with that. But avoid Buffalo and preferably avoid New England. The Steelers won that first game, but it was, it still came down to the final drive when they had 5 takeaways. That's a problem. New England's a very good team with a really good running game. I prefer not to play the Patriots if I'm the Steelers. For the Chargers and the Jaguars, I'm fine with both of those matchups. But with that said, I think that'll wrap us up for this edition of the show. If you're watching on YouTube and you're not subscribed yet, please do so. Helps out the channel. I know it can be annoying. Every YouTube video you watch, everybody says that. So I do apologize because it annoys me when I hear it. But it does help out the channel. We're almost at 3,000 subscribers. Yeah, it's a small channel. It's me doing all of this. This is very much a one-man show here. So subscribing does help, even if you don't think it does. So does liking the video. It helps spread it out into the algorithm and whatnot, and it gets more views for this. So if you can do that, appreciate it. We'll be back later on in the week to get you set for Steelers-Lions. I have my own thoughts about that game. But I'm going to be completely positive today because last night was a complete ass kicking and I've got nothing to complain about when it comes to that. So we'll be back on the channel for Steelers Lions later on in the week, as well as the full week 16 preview on the pump fake. So subscribe to the channel, like the videos, spread them around, tell a friend. We'll be back later on in the week. Until then, take care. It's Bleav in Steelers.